So hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, which is substantiating claims for baby and child products. So just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded and I will send out the recording afterwards. So don't worry too much if you kind of come in halfway through or need to leave or anything like that. There's also going to be a chance for a Q&A at the end. So there's a little Q&A box, just probably at the bottom of your screen. And you can put questions in there as we go or wait till the end and I'll be really happy to answer them towards the end of the webinar. So yeah, I wanted to focus on baby and child products today because it's something that we often test. So as a consumer research company, which I'll go into a bit more, we test all types of products from literally birth onwards, and even before in kind of pregnancy products and things like that. So I really wanted to talk about that kind of side of it because there are obviously kind of regulations we have to take into consideration and also think about how we can, get the right claims for the right type of products there. And this can really range from anything from baby food to nappies to, sort of cosmetics. So we can sort of have that all in mind. I'll talk about different regulations, but really a lot of this will be applicable to any industry. So don't worry too much if it's not maybe the product type you're thinking about in particular, but think about the kind of overall things we'll talk about, the trends we'll talk about. So to give you kind of an agenda for today, we're going to talk about an overview of the baby and childcare products industry, just to get an idea of, what we're looking at here. Some global regulations for advertising in general. So as I say, it doesn't really matter too much which industry you're in. There are quite applicable regulations there. Some successful marketing claims and looking at kind of case studies of those and the appropriate study design and methodology for them as well, so you can think about how we test it. And in doing that, we'll be really focused on consumer research, as I mentioned. Obviously, there are other types of testing as well, which we might touch on, but really we're going to be focused on the consumer research side. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Carys and I am the Regulatory Director at Ayton Global Research. So I've been at the company for about 8 years now, and my passion really lies within the regulations that are anything to do with what we're involved in, really. So it's obviously advertising regulations. That's something that comes into everything we do because we're really focused generally on claim substantiation and getting the right evidence behind your claims, but also looking at the best claims you can make about your product as well. Kind of an encompassing market research and evidence-based research. So yeah, I'm looking at kind of advertising regulations, but also any regulations in the FMCG industries which affect the evidence we're providing, and globally as well, because obviously a lot of our clients are global, and we want to make sure that those claims are going to be able to be used in every territory they're looking at, on every platform they're looking to sell on as well. So to kind of get our minds in the kind of right focus for the child products market, we just want to get out some kind of market research and some general article clips as well to kind of think about where we're going with the industry at the moment. So it's obviously a really big market and it's looking at a substantial increase. So a lot of the cosmetics industries and kind of FMCG industries are growing. They will continue to grow. We're a growing population. And there's much more kind of middle class coming into play, more expenditure, many people can spend. So yeah, but the baby care industry really is one of the top ones that are going to increase. There's still some really big players in the game here. So Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark and Johnson & Johnson are very much the leading companies, have been for many years. So really looking at those as kind of like the kind of big players in the industry really. But we are seeing more kind of independent brands coming up. I think that's the case in any industry again, and especially where consumers are more, I suppose, more aware of looking at kind of like helping support local businesses, helping to support small businesses, but also looking at the kind of investment they're making. So there's all of those big companies, but also don't kind of be put off by it. There's certainly a place for independent companies as well, if that's where you're coming from. So also like kind of looking at where in the world we're looking at these emerging kind of growth in the industry. So Asia Pacific, India and China are really driving the demand for baby care products as well. So really good if you're kind of looking at marketing in those areas, but certainly North America and Europe have really been the lead in kind of making kind of purchasing in that market, and they will continue to do so as well. Kind of factors that we're thinking of why this is becoming more popular, why is there more of a demand? There's more awareness about infant nutrition, hygiene, and in developing and safety in developing regions, as well as kind of the more Western regions as well, that have always maybe invested a lot more. So it's important to think about where you'll be putting your market, and also why that's happening as well. I want to talk about COVID-19, and I think it's something really important. It's obviously not going anywhere anytime soon. Certainly, I don't know if you're based in the UK like I am, things are not looking very good at the moment. So we really need to think about how it's going to impact the industries we're working in. So baby care is one of those industries and child products that haven't been too affected, and in fact actually have seen quite sort of an injection into the economy actually from those. So certainly in the initial weeks, this kind of clip from Men's Health, from their market research specifically about childcare products in the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a real surge in things like nappies and wipes, and certainly people were really stocking up on things. So that was quite a kind of cautious thing, and it continues to be cautious. People are worried about things selling out in stores, and people are worried about people like not having enough product, and people buying it, or basically bulk buying it. And certainly things like online sales, as with most industries, have really seen a surge as well. So really important to think about your online market. This is hugely important when it comes to claims, because what we're really looking at when you're selling products is what the marketing regulations are in the country in which you're selling them. So when we're thinking about having evidence behind our claims, it becomes even more important when we're selling online, because you're going to have a lot of advertising regulations looking at your claims, and maybe be more exposed to complaints and things like that. So we'll touch on that in a bit, but certainly this is a kind of time in the world where people need to be more conscious of having evidence behind their claims, because you're much more exposed with online marketing than you maybe were kind of in store. So we've also seen a huge surge in demand for nappies or diapers, when there's been a huge growth during the pandemic. There's also been companies such as Kimberly Clark and the Honest Company who have looked at putting in partnerships with charities for it as well, which is fantastic to see. So I kind of want to talk about the general regulation for advertising first, to get us in that kind of advertising regulation mind. So really what we're looking at this point, when I talk about ad regulation, this is the point where your product is on the market and it's being shown, your adverts are being shown out there. So people always ask me, is there, maybe for cosmetics, for example, isn't there something in the regulation for cosmetics that say you have to have advertising claim substantiation? Absolutely there is. It doesn't matter where you look in the world, wherever you're registering your cosmetics, and actually the same in most FMCG industries, it is part of the regulation to have evidence behind your claims. It's just that it might not be something that's being so closely monitored. Whereas once your product's actually on the market, you've got the advertising regulations that are now involved as well. So it's when you really have to be really conscious. So ad self-regulation is generally the way this is dealt with, and it's the way the industry regulates itself. It's quite simple. So by saying that, it means that there's no regulatory body that's going around picking up every product on the shelf and sort of saying, are those claims substantiated? Can I see the evidence for it? Or looking on social media, or looking, on your websites. Generally, it is done on a complaints-based basis. So it'll either be your consumers or it might be your competitors, which is a really important thing as well. People forget that your competitors can complain about you. They might see your adverts and sort of suggest, question whether the evidence is there to substantiate your claims. That would get reported to a self-regulatory organisation, and they'll approach you for your evidence. So it kind of works in that process. There is more of a cracking down going on generally worldwide. I'm seeing more and more of it, where there are kind of, not necessarily always on a complaints basis, but these are self-regulatory organisations are actually looking at adverts that are out there as well, if they seem really unlikely to have evidence behind their claims. So basically, once you've got your product on your market, I guess what I'm saying is you have to be super cautious that you do have that evidence there. Even if you've managed to get away with not having that evidence in place through your registration process, if you've got a responsible person, say in the EU or the UK or now China, and they've kind of let you get away with not having that evidence, it doesn't mean that you're clear and that you've kind of got away with not having it, because now you're in the public domain and your evidence can be challenged. So essentially, there's three parts of the industry. So if any of these three apply for you, you need to know what the advertising regulations are in the countries that you're selling. That's the advertisers who pay for the advertising agencies responsible for its form and content, and the media that carry it. So if either of that rings true to you and you're not sure of the ad regulations in the countries that you're selling your product, I would very much suggest that you take a look into it. You'll probably, you could be compliant. And generally, as long as you follow these kind of rules, and I'll go through these, you're fine. It's only if you know you're not doing something that maybe getting away with something, basically. I'm just going to put a couple of links there as well to where to start if you're looking at those. You've got the International Chamber of Commerce, who have a framework for countries to adopt. So that's a really good place to look to get an idea of what that framework is and which countries have adopted it. And you've also got ICAS, which is the International Council of Advertising Self-Regulation. And that's a lot of different SROs or self-regulatory organizations, which have come together, follow a lot of the same kind of code of conduct, put out news and things like that. And there's a whole list of all the members. So generally, that's a really good place to start as well. Just wanted to bring up a couple of those examples because it all seems very kind of overall at the moment. What do these organizations look like? Who are they? And I've just picked out some examples from across the world. So in the UK, you've got the ASA. In India, you've got the ASCI. In Australia, you've got Ad Standards, and in Brazil, you've got CONAR. They are all part of ICAS, so that's why I've selected them. The one in the middle is the kind of outlier that I wanted to bring up, which is in the USA. You've got the FTC and the FDA as well. Both are kind of involved in the advertising process claims sort of side, and they're federal organizations. So where I was saying before, most of the time it's ad self-regulation. In the USA, it is not, it is federal. So you need to be really, really cautious over there. There is kind of a wild west over there when it comes to claim substantiation. A lot of people get away with not having claims substantiated. The issue is if you get caught out, you're much more likely to have a lawsuit rather than it may be over in the UK when they just sort of say, please remove the ad. You do that, you don't have to kind of go through any other process. And if you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble. But with the FTC, yeah, you do see a lot of companies getting really, really huge fines and sued, and you don't want to go down that route. There's also different laws you need to think about. So I just want to briefly touch on this. If you look at these countries you're selling in and go, actually, there's no SRO in that country, I don't need to worry too much. I can carry on doing kind of things about and have any substantiation. There are also laws that you need to look out for as well. So it might be they don't have an organization that's doing ad self-regulation, but you could be going against the law. So I kind of brought out some different examples here. And in the UAE, you've got the National Media Council. So they have their own SRO, which is the Advertising Business Group, but they also have the National Media Council, which is the federal organization. So be cautious of both if you're in the UAE. As I mentioned earlier, you've also got the FDA in America, so you need to be aware of what their kind of laws are there. And in China, you've got the advertising law of the People's Republic of China, and that was kind of reinstated in 2015. So if you haven't looked at it since before then, maybe kind of refresh your memory. Although I can't believe that's 6 years ago now. It's crazy. So cosmetic compliance is the next thing that I want to kind of come on to. So we've looked at the general industry and the general kind of regulatory bodies you need to be aware of and where to find them, for advertising. But I do want to be a bit specific with cosmetics because obviously it's really where we see the most claims. So it's where we tend to get the most studies in that industry. But obviously we need to be really cautious that, especially for children and babies, that the products are safe before we get any kind of testing done from our side. So there are kind of things to consider with safety testing when it comes to baby products in particular. I've taken out some examples from Europe here, but obviously with the EU and UK now, they've kind of got the same regulations for the time being. So if you're in either of those, this is really applicable. But also, basically, if you're in other countries, do look out for what the regulations are, especially when it comes to safety testing for children. The main thing is that there shouldn't be any ingredients that are going to be sort of potent allergies, that have got any kind of preservatives should be in their lowest concentration. we're trying to make the products to be as non-toxic as possible. Cosmetics are always non-toxic, so I don't want to kind of cause any rifts there. Of course they're non-toxic, but it's the idea that everything should be in its lowest kind of percentage. We want to make sure they're very mild formulations that we're looking for children. There is this Safe Cosmetics for Young Children, a guide for manufacturers and safety assessors, which has come from the Council of Europe Committee of Experts on Cosmetic Products. And that's a really handy thing to look at, which looks at the safety criteria for cosmetic formulations, particularly for children. It's something really important for us before we do any consumer studies. Obviously, when it comes to testing, you can't do a safety test on a baby. It's unethical. You need to look to your safety assessor to see if it's safe to use on children. So they need to approve that the product is safe for it to be used on babies and children before we can then test on our panel. And I can help with what kind of more information on that, basically. So let me know if you do need any more on that. But again, safe testing isn't what I conduct, but it's really important that it has had that process before it comes to us for claims. So on that note, what is consumer research? So basically, but that's what we do for claim substantiation in particular. There are other routes. You've got clinical, basically, and consumer. They're the kind of two branches. Very often you might need to use both, but I want to focus on what we can conduct through consumer research in particular. It's a really good place to look at first because it is, to be honest, a lot cheaper and a lot quicker. It's quite simple that when you're looking at a clinical study, you have separate instrumental tests to measure different things. For a consumer research study, we can do one study and get the consumers to self-assess as many claims as we like. So really, that's kind of why it's more cost efficient. So we tend to look at consumer research first, and if we've got a claim that we know needs an instrumental study, we've got partners that we can reach out to directly for those. So consumer research studies, as I mentioned, tend to be in-use tests, and they tend to be in-home studies. So consumers would get sent the product to test at home. There are other methodologies available, but that's really what we're looking at most of the time, 99% of the time. We want to get an in-home study. This is because we get the actual conditions of the product in use. So, they'll get the usage instructions that they would have on the labels of the bottle. They use it that way. They use the amount that they'd be used to using, and you get that real reflection of how they're actually going to enjoy the product. So it's really valid and real data. Again, if you have clinical studies only, you might not get this feedback and find that consumers complain about your product because you've had this 48-hour moisturization test done and you can prove that the loss of water retention is reduced and things like this. But actually, if a consumer uses your product and says my skin felt dry, you're kind of at the drawing board, no matter what the instrumental studies are saying. If they can't perceive that, you're at a bit of a dead end, really. So it's really important for us to look at as well, and it's really valid. So yeah, it's a great way of getting the actual conditions, and that applies to undesirable events as well. So again, you might have a safety test about the product, and especially when we're looking at babies and children, the safety assessor may have approved the product, but actually, if the parents start using it on their children and say, yeah, this was horrible, my child's skin, they felt very uncomfortable, we're not looking at serious undesirable events because we've had the safety assessor approve it, but actually it's not very pleasant for them to use and they feel irritated or itchy or anything like that. We need to get that feedback before it goes onto the market. So why use consumer research? I've kind of broken down some other options here as well, because obviously we talk about claim substantiation today, but really what you want to look at with consumer research is everything else you can get out of it at the same time. As I mentioned, we're doing one big study and we can kind of combine lots of other research attributes into that as well. So claim substantiation is kind of at the top of the list in this instance, but what else could you look for? Well, it's always helps with new product development decisions. As I said, if you get lots of not serious, but some undesirable events back, you might look at redeveloping that product, reformulating it. And again, it could be something like they don't like the fragrance, anything like that. Any feedback you get, you could look at, making changes before you launch the product, which is really helpful. And that kind of comes into your product perceptions, but also you can think about your brand perceptions as well. Now, all consumer research studies that are used for claim substantiation need to be unbranded. We can't reveal the brand, we don't need bias. But what we can look at doing is conducting a kind of study with all the claims, and then towards the end of it saying, okay, now you've answered all the questions without bias about how the product affected you. Keeping that in mind, what do you think about how this is going to be branded? Now you're looking at the pictures of the label and how we're going to name it or anything like that, and get those perceptions. And it's great because they've already used the product, they've already made up their mind about it. And then we're thinking about actually, how do they feel about how that's being branded? If they like the product, do they think the branding suits it? If they don't like the product, do they think that the branding would have swayed them? All of these kinds of things, which are really helpful to get back for your marketing teams. You can look at different comparison testing, so benchmarking against a competitor, and I'll look at that a little bit today in a case study. But also things like reformulation. So again, if you have a supplier that you need to change supplier, for example, and you've got to use a different manufacturer, and you're worried that the quality might not be the same as your current one, you can do a bit of a test to look at the formulations. But you can also use it on a positive side and do a new and improved formula claim if you have to make any changes as well. You can investigate new markets. That's again part of being global. Anywhere you want to launch, we can conduct your study and investigate that. Things like testimonials and reviews you can gain, photos and videos, and things like getting feedback on the packaging and the price points. So examples of the kinds of claims that we can substantiate through consumer research. We've got things like 88% of people agree their baby's nappy rash was improved. 9 out of 10 people would recommend this to other families. 96% of people agree that it's suitable for their child's sensitive skin. Anything that people can perceive themselves and self-assess is what we're looking at in particular. So now I kind of looked at the kind of overview of, kind of testing and things like that. What we're really thinking about when we're developing our claims. So we almost want to take it a step back and say, now we know we want to go over the consumer research study. What do we need to keep in mind when we're making our claims? So instead of kind of getting all your claims in place for your marketing team and then going and say, actually, can we say this? This is where I really like the EU cosmetics regulation 6 common criteria, because if you start thinking about this in the very first instance, when you start developing your product, it will be a really smooth process. So even if you're not in the EU or the UK, this is a really helpful 6 kind of guide. And if you're not in cosmetics either, still really handy. So I really like these common criteria. So the first one is legal compliance. Obviously, the products need to be legally compliant, and you cannot use that as a advert for your product. You can't say, complies with the EU regulation. Every product has to, and if you start kind of making a song and dance about it, it makes it sound like your competitors aren't complying, and it would be a really unfair claim to make. So comply, but don't kind of make a song and dance about it, just comply. You need to be truthful. So if you have, for example, a lavender baby oil, it needs to have lavender in it. You can't, it needs to be in a perceivable amount of lavender. You can't kind of just say that. I feel like that's quite obvious, but you would be really surprised what you see. You need to have evidential support. That's where we're talking about research and claim substantiation. That's part of the criteria for the cosmetics regulation. As I said, it might be a part of regulations, but then people still might get away with it. But then you've got the advertising standards saying the same things. So I can't stress basically how important it is. If you say anything about your product, you need to be able to prove it. It has to be honest. So, for example, you couldn't have a study that was maybe with 50 responses and you had 90% of them agree with your claims, and say, okay, well, 50 doesn't sound very good for our advert. We want to say 100 people. You have to say exactly who tested your product and exactly what kind of test. You have to be very honest. And you need to be fair, so especially when you're looking at comparisons for competitors, you can, for example, let's say do a normal baby oil against the lavender baby oil, and say the lavender baby oil made them have a more rested sleep. Well, that's not very fair because the other one didn't have lavender in it, which is what we know we associate with that. So you need to test like for like. And essentially, all of these things together do help your consumer make an informed decision about your product. So exactly, what I'm saying about being really honest with what you're saying, putting everything out there that you can, so your consumer can go on your website or pick up the product in store, and they know that they're making the best decision by purchasing your product. Types of claims as well. So I'll just kind of briefly go through these, because the CTPA, which is the Cosmetics, Toiletries and Perfumery Association, and again, even if you're from different industries, I think these are really helpful things to bear in mind. Basically, like I said, once you've kind of looked at your different claims that you want to make, and thought about those, those 6 common criteria, you can then think about how you are going to need to test them. So these are a really helpful breakdown of the different types of claims there are. The sensory and product aesthetics, it's all to do with how the product looks, smells, feels, the texture, everything like that. Your performance claims, does it actually do the efficacy of is the efficacy stand? So does it moisturize the skin? Does it help you sleep better? All those kinds of things. Ingredient claims, lavender, you can say that these products have it in them, so you can make those kinds of claims. Always get the final product tested, even if you're making ingredient claims, because there is nothing to say that you're going to have the same effect when it's delivered in your final product. Combination claims, that's quite simple. This shampoo works best with this conditioner. Those products have to have been tested together to be able to make that claim. Comparison claims we've touched on. You could be a new formulation, could be a benchmark. Subjective claims, I would buy this product. It has to be an opinion. That's something you can't prove with science. I would recommend this product. And objective claims, so things, this skin is moisturized, the hair has less breakage, things like this. They're all objective claims that are, scientific. They can't kind of be an opinion. So now I've kind of looked at all the different kinds of claims you can make and how you can substantiate them. I just want to show some examples of how they're actually displayed, essentially. So we've got some advertising claims online on people's websites. So for example, on Child's Farm, they've really focused on the irritation side, as I mentioned earlier. So they've done a user trial with newborns and babies and children with eczema, and they said that it does not cause any irritation to their child's skin. So that's our actual use. We've had the safety assessment, but now in actual use, 100% of the parents said, yeah, I agree, this doesn't cause an irritation. So that's really what they're focusing on there. Eucerin, so this is obviously a product that can be used for all ages, but it is encouraged for children as well. And they've got some lovely user claims on there. So we've got 97% of people agreed that the products improve their skin condition, and that it supports a better sleep. So I don't need to scratch a lot during the night. I don't wake up early due to skin problems, with some lovely 90% across the board there. Weleda have got 80% say that it calms the skin in a parent's assessment after 28 days. But they've also got their clinical claim on there as well. So it's kind of shows where you can have a mixture. So you've got your kind of user trial, but you've also got 35% increased skin moisture as well. That's done through a clinical study. So you've got both there. Television as well, as you might see these kinds of claims. So I've kind of selected a few different kind of claims that you'll see. So nappies are obviously saying they've got a gentle absorb layer. So you can see there's a little asterisk there, so they'll quote the kind of number of people at the bottom of the screen. Couldn't quite get that clip on YouTube. 61% of 307 mums agreed. This was a Boots survey. And then we've also got this one about pediatricians recommending the product. The doctor's #1 recommended, and that was in India for a Johnson & Johnson product there as well. So you can kind of see the different kinds of claims and how they're used, but again, they all need substantiation. And just to kind of nod about claims and on labels and packaging, because it's something that people kind of forget about. They say, I haven't put any claims on TV, I haven't put any claims on my website, but it's like, well, when you put your product on the market, does it say anything about what the product can achieve on the label? Does it say, for soft skin, does it say 48 hours protection, anything like that? And if it does, that needs to be substantiated as well. So this was from ICAS that I mentioned earlier. And they were kind of saying that before they weren't really looking at a lot of labels as much, but it has become something that they're really looking at. So just be really conscious. So I just want to go through a couple of case studies now. So I've got a couple of case studies to go through just to give you an idea of bringing it back to consumer research, what we conduct, and how we can design the studies to make sure you have the evidence required. So this is a childcare brand we're looking at, firstly, and it's an Ivera shampoo. This is from a brand who create products for all ages and skin conditions. And generally, the aim for the study is to gather their evidential support for their cosmetic claims, to make sure the claims are going to be compliant in their relevant markets, and all of their advertising platforms. And they really want to make sure target their claims around different age ranges, including newborns, and that it's suitable for sensitive and eczema prone skin. So you see this quite a lot for children products, because you really want to make sure that they don't have irritations, you know, for their very delicate skin types. So the protocol here is it's a single placement, which means we're just investigating the shampoo on its own. It's a 14-day study. That's plenty enough for a shampoo. We can also help, you know, kind of suggest different study durations. We want female and male, they're children, so it doesn't matter too much about gender. We just want to make sure we get that overall kind of feedback from the parents and their children. We've got newborns on there. That's really important for us to make sure we've got feedback from newborns. Well, from the parents of the newborns, but also with children that have got sensitive and eczema prone skin. We obviously can't get newborns with sensitive or eczema prone skin because they are way too young to be able to make that kind of diagnosis, generally if we're looking at 0 to 3 months. So yes, we kind of do that at a bit of an older age range. They also need to be using shampoo so they can, you know, we don't want to kind of introduce a new product. So this is the results from that study, just to give you an idea of now what kind of claims we ask and how we know if they're substantiated or not. So this has been lifted from our reports. We have a kind of whole report you get, and right at the end, there is this kind of summary table to say what all the questions are and who agreed and who disagreed with each statement. So on the left-hand side, these are the questions that we asked, or the statements we asked them to agree with. Then we've got the number of people that were satisfied, neutral, or not satisfied, and most importantly, the percentage of people that were satisfied, neutral, or not satisfied. Why is it most important that it's percentage? Because as we've seen on the online adverts, people quote the percentage of how many people agreed with it, and they lift that straight into their advert. So, for example, on this one, we can say quite happily that 92% of parents agreed that their child's delicate hair was gently cleansed. We can take that straight out. It also lets us know if we've achieved the pass mark for the study. So generally, we're looking at a statistical majority of people agreeing with each statement. That's about 66%. But some people can, you know, let's set it higher if they want to as well. So some people like to do 70% if they're going to advertise on television. There's all these kinds of things to bear in mind. And as you can see, they've got the asterisk by them, and that means they've passed the pass mark. So we've also got other claims on there about the scalp looking soothed, the itchy scalp being relieved, and the scalp being soothed and flake free as well. So yeah, some great claims to kind of carry forward for them. Kind of bringing that back to the legislation. So this was really important because the market for this product was in the EU, and this is what the EASA have got to say about kind of claim substantiation, and they're the advertising standards for the whole of the EU. So they're basically saying that you need to have documentary evidence to substantiate your claims before you put the product to publication, the advert to publication. You need to be able to provide that evidence as well without delay to the relevant SRO. So the ESA are kind of over the EU, but within that, they've got a country one, which kind of regulates for their country. So really important to be sure that we're following the regulations there. The other case study I wanted to go through is a little bit different. So I just wanted to kind of look at this one as well, because we're looking at a comparison study. So this is for nappy pants, so a bit of a different kind of product type as well. We're basically looking at evaluating 4 different products for this one. 3 is for the manufacturer's own brands, and then the 4th is a benchmark competitor. So we can basically see which of their brands, you know, perform the best, but also how does it match against their competitor as well. Fantastic kind of study design to do if this is something, you know, that you're kind of involved in. So the main thing they wanted to compare were about leakage, absorption, and fit. So the kind of design for this study is obviously a bit different. So it's called a sequential study. Basically, this means that we've divided the volunteers into groups of 4. One will test A first, one will test B first, C first, or D first, and then they rotate it. So they'll then kind of rotate in an order. This removes any bias from the study about which one you tested first, which one you tested last, and they kind of do a questionnaire after each one. So we take that information straight away and compare all the results at the end. So a great study design for this kind of thing as well. So we did a week per nappy code, let's say. So 28 days in total. The children had to already wear nappy pants. Again, we need to make sure they're using the product already. There's not a new introduction. We had a kind of division of the of the different panel that we're looking for here as well. So like girls and boys 50-50, but we also wanted 50% of them to wear the competitor brand and for 50% of them to wear the own retail brand they were testing. So we're also getting that feedback, blind, it's a blind study, they don't know which one's which, but we know which one of them usually uses that product. So we get kind of another layer to that feedback as well. So again, we've got the results here, the same kind of table we had before. And we can see the different products and how they've been rated. So this question is just about the leakage protection. And you can see I've got in brackets, so the 101, 102, 103, 104. That's the codes we have assigned the products. So it's all the same question for the different products. And as you can see, there's quite a stark difference between, the 104 is certainly the winner with 78%. And 101 is certainly the loser there. But then we've also got these products in between. So does that mean that 104 is better than all of the other products? Because that means it's got the highest percentage. Well, there's another layer to the statistics here, and I wanted to bring them up as well. So essentially, we also want to do a 2-key test. Now, this is a lot of technical information, but I just want to explain that this is how we work out what you are allowed to say about your competitors as well. Essentially, we're looking if there's now a statistical significant difference. We know that nappy pants, sample them. We go back a slide actually. We know that 103 has got 70% and 104 has got 78%, but are they significantly different from each other? So we did this 2-key analysis, and actually, when we break it down, 4 is only significantly better than 1. It's not significantly better than 3 or 2. So we can say with very much confidence that yes, it's better than product 1, but even though it's got a much higher percentage on the overall than product 3 with 8% higher, it's still not statistically significant. So what we could do there is we could test on more people and get more data behind it to get confidence in the data, so we can say if there's a statistical significance there. So just a nice, interesting kind of other thing to look at in terms of claims there. And I've also wanted to bring up some legislation there as well in terms of what the ASA have to say about comparisons. And it's basically saying that if you're looking at different, different comparisons, you're likely to need a large amount of technical evidence. We need to ensure that the consumers aren't misled, essentially. So as I said, making sure there's a statistical significance within the comparison of the data, it means that you're able to make these kinds of claims as well. So that's kind of our case studies I wanted to look at, and how you can really use your evidence to substantiate your claims and kind of get some great claims about your products. I also wanted to kind of touch on removed ads or kind of what not to do, essentially. The most important thing about this page I want to bring up is that these are all from newspapers. So the worst thing you can do if you're not conscious about ad self-regulation is you'll get really bad press. Now, I'm not saying that the companies that are involved in this knew what they were doing. They were like, yeah, we're going to say about product, we don't really care, we're going to say it anyway. Most of the time people are very innocent and they think that they've been able to say it, but it's where you have to be really, really cautious that you're incredibly confident with the evidence you have behind your claims. So for example, we've got a thing about misleading ads for Ombre Solaire, and this was to do with the level of UVA, misleading level of UVA. They'd gone from it was their own marketing team basically had in a 3-star kind of thing rating basically, and 3-star used to be their highest. Then they decided to change it to a 5-star, but it made it look like their 3-star ones were worse, but actually they just changed the rating, because they wanted to start doing it as a 5-star one. So it's a really interesting case, and I said completely innocent. They've kind of just gone, actually the marketing team said actually let's say 5-star instead of 3-star, but in doing that it made every 3-star product look like it was not as good, which we don't want to do. We've also got an interesting one here for a kind of a feeding bottle, and it basically they had a study to say about reducing colic, but the clinical studies they showed didn't have evidence from the right age group of babies. So again, we need to be really cautious that our consumer group is really reflective of who are actually saying it's going to help. And then really recent one as well, we've got a lot of talk about microbiome in the industry at the moment, especially if you're on cosmetics. So I thought this was quite an interesting one. And Unilever and hot water, because their baby dove wash, basically they said about it helping nourish the skin microbiome. But the evidence they've got it's the word nourish essentially, and they've got no evidence to say it nourishes the microbiome. And that's still an ongoing case. So again, it's just kind of bringing it out there. Be really, really cautious about the evidence you've got and if it's appropriate. So thank you very much for listening to that side of it. Before we go to Q&A, I'm just going to go through kind of some information about our company and some FAQs. So firstly, obviously I've talked to you about consumer research and why you should use it, but I just want to touch on why you should use us in particular. So we're an award-winning research agency. We've won awards for international business, for family business, kind of things like that. We are fully GDPR compliant. Of course, we have to be by law, but we also have an ISO 27001, which means we get audited on this process, and our own in-house chief data protection officer. So it's very important what we're doing. We have a huge panel of volunteers that are global. We need to protect their data, but we also need to protect your intellectual property as well if you place a study with us. We've got interlocal event reporting all built in, which I've kind of talked about. That's all in accordance with the Cosmetic Vigilance Act and any other regulations that we need to be aware of. We've got full product liability insurance. We've got an ISO 9001, which is to do with our quality control. We're a partner to the Market Research Society, which means that our research is ethical, and we also get training on things like study design, questionnaire design, specifically for things like claim substantiation. You get bespoke regulatory advice. That's what I'm here for. So always feel free to reach out to me. And you also get a designated study manager. That's how I started off in the company. You get to know your clients inside out. And you get to know their research objectives, how they conduct their studies and everything like that. So further advice, I just want to go through some FAQs before we go to the question and answer. So we generally say a panel size starting at 100 responses. This can be really subjective depending on the number, the countries you're looking at, the subgroups you're investigating, the claims you're investigating. But it's a good starting number to have in your head, because some people don't even know, they're like, is 20 enough? Is 200 too much? Well, 100 is probably your best bet. You need to inform your product liability insurance that you're doing studies, and that we have product liability insurance as well. You need to ensure your samples are safety tested. I touched on this earlier. We need to make sure things are branded so there's no bias, and I touched on that a bit. And you also need to make sure your questionnaire design will support your claims, and we can give you some specialist advice on that. So I'm keen to go to questions because I can see some coming in already. But yeah, please feel free to start typing them in, and feel free to challenge me. Even if I can't answer you right now, I will certainly do my best to find out for you. So can you give some examples of the sort of claims you may need additional evidence for in the baby care, child and cosmetic market? So that's quite a broad question again. Generally though, the best way I can explain this is that for most claims, you can do different types of evidence. So let's say, for example, if I use moisturization as our example, you could get that through a consumer study. You could say the skin feels moisturized. But you might want to have something, I said that Weleda example, and it was like 35% increased level of moisture. We can't get a consumer to analyze that because they can't say what percentage it's increased by. So that's where you might want to get clinical evidence if you want to word it in that way. So very often we work with people and we just help them word things in a way that means they can use consumer research, because as I said, it's saving you time and money, but also because they do tend to be more resonant with your consumer. You'll be surprised how many people, as long as they see moisturization, they don't really look at the percentages. So you can get a consumer research study to prove that. So really it is down to the wording more than anything else, especially when it comes to the baby child kind of cosmetic market in particular. And we can really help you with that. I think the best thing I tend to do with people, like a new client, send me all of your claims. I'll either say to you, right, well, we can do it in a consumer research study, but we might have to change this wording. Or I can say we can do the consumer research study for this 20 claims you're looking at, but for this one, I would say we should do it as a clinical study and get that clinical evidence for it. You're still saving a lot of money because you're still getting all the other claims through consumer research. So I hope that really helps. I think the best thing to do is if you're unsure, just feel free to be specific and kind of reach out separately. Is suitable for eczema skin a cosmetic claim or borderline to medical claim? That's a very good question, and it's a really good point. We can't say eczema for cosmetic, but there is a very particular wording that you can use. So if you look on the CTPA website, they have this really helpful document on there, which basically says the exact wording, and it's something like may also be suitable for eczema prone skin. So that's what you kind of say. If you want to go down just cosmetic route, you say it in that way. You don't say for eczema prone skin. However, we test, as I said, we test all different types of product. So if your product is borderline or medical, we can still test it and we can still substantiate your claims. It's just your process that you have to go through for registration. But yeah, certainly, I mean, that thing on the CTPA is really helpful. If you just type in eczema claims into the CTPA, they have the exact wording. Be cautious, do a consumer study anyway, because you're going to need to prove that it actually is good for eczema prone skin. You can't just say it, you need to have some kind of evidence behind it. So I hope that helps. So according to the cosmetics industry, until what age are they considered babies? I'm not going to know off the top of my head, but I know that there is a kind of different process for safety assessors for anything below 3 years. That's where we know we can't do kind of any testing on safety testing side. Like I said, we can test on babies because they've already been proven safe. They're about to be launched on the market. They're about to be sold to people that are newborn, so it's absolutely fine. So yeah, I know that under 3 years is what they're considered kind of babies in terms of safety. So I'm not 100% sure on, you know, what, I guess in the cosmetics industry is quite broad as well. Do you mean kind of in marketing, in registration of the cosmetics, that kind of thing? So yeah, maybe I can help a bit more. Feel free to email me as well if you've got some more information, and I can kind of provide a more definite answer for you there. But I hope that's been helpful anyway. So I've got no more questions here yet, so I don't think we have any more come through. As I mentioned, I'm going to email this recording, so you'll have my direct email address. Please do feel free to email me if you get any questions come up later down the line. I'd be happy to help. So to kind of summarize, well, before I kind of close off the webinar itself, I just want to talk about the next webinars I've got coming up. We've got Brexit testing and implications next week, which I'll be hosting with my German franchisee, Thomas Marquardt. So we'll be looking at basically the EU, UK side and any implications that are happening. We've got on the 5th of February, making effective and compliant advertising claims in South America in particular, so I'll be delving deep into the regulations there. On the 12th, we've got substantiating claims for electrical products and tools, so things like anything from a hairdryer to an air fryer is kind of what I'm looking at. On the 19th, we've got panel sizes and implications, so where I mentioned very briefly about the 100 responses, I'll delve into that and talk about what's appropriate. And we'll be finishing off February with cosmetic trends for 2021, how we can substantiate certain types of claims. So also I want to just direct your attention to the SCS. They've got their distance learning course in the Essentials of Cosmetic Science. If that is something that interests you, please do look at their website. There's also going to be the IFSCC in September 2022. Fingers crossed we're going to be able to go ahead with a live event by then. I really hope so. And you can register your event there, interest at the website there. There is my contact information, but I will send out an email. Thank you so much for listening today. I've really enjoyed hosting this, and I really enjoyed answering your questions as well. So please feel free to reach out if you've got anything further, and have a wonderful rest of your Friday and weekend. Cheers, bye.